Hi, loves, and welcome to the With Love Always podcast, a podcast to help you live the life you were created for. We are your hosts and your friends, Bree
and Marissa,
and we're so grateful you're here.
We pray you listen and leave feeling more inspired, encouraged, and uplifted. Hi, guys, and welcome back to another episode. Today, we are talking all about how to battle burnout. And this is kind of an exciting topic, but also I feel like it's unfortunately something that we're all too familiar with. And specifically, we were just talking about burnout right before this, and we feel like we are in the thick of it. Mm-hmm. Not sure if you can hear in my voice and also Bree's, we're getting over being a little bit sick right now. So apologies for the raspy voice. We just kind of want to unpack just burnout in its entirety. So how to identify if you're burnt out, because I feel like a lot of us don't even realize until we start to experience these kind of drastic symptoms from it. What kind of the causes are, why we're even feeling that in the first place, how to prevent it so we don't end up in this place. Yes. And then lastly, we're going to be touching on what to do if you are burnt out. So really how we can rest and recover and ensure that we can actually battle this and overcome it and not be stuck in just this cycle.
Yes, and we're so excited to talk about burnout today, just because right before we hit record, I was confiding in Marissa about how I'm feeling really burnt out. And I think that is like the ultimate beauty of why we have this podcast, is because we are ultimately inviting you guys into the friendship with us, into the conversation with us. And by no means are anything we're talking about on this podcast something that we've overcome. It's something that we are so in the thick of. We just hope and pray that in that relevancy that we can really encourage you guys. If you are going through burnout today, or if you are feeling lost, or if you are starting to identify these signs of just feeling completely depleted, we're here for you, and we're going to share our experience. We're going to share ways we can identify this together, and also ways we can really overcome that together. So we're so excited to talk about burnout.
So kind of launching into what exactly burnout is, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that phrase, but I think it can kind of be used as a blanket statement. So I'm going to try to get a little bit specific. So I personally believe burnout is so much more than feeling busy. I think it goes beyond just day-to-day busyness and chaos, and it really becomes this feeling of just ultimate depletion. And I think that can be physical depletion, emotional depletion, spiritual depletion. I think it just kind of carries over into every sector of our life. I think the main cause is really just it happens when we're extended beyond our capacity as a human being. And so some words that just kind of come to mind when I'm thinking of the phrase burnout are just overwhelmed, drained, depleted, all of these kind of brutal words. But what kind of comes to mind for you when you hear burnout?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and gosh, I just feel like being in a state of burnout is something that a majority of us are experiencing and actually operating out of more often than not. When I think about it, I think the way that our world is kind of structured, and even the way that cultural standards and expectations that are placed on us really sets us up for a burnt out life. Like, I think we're always kind of presented this message of work hard and grind and do the most. And we're just, even with social media, expected to live this extravagantly full life at all times. Like, there doesn't ever really appear to be this moment of rest, or appear to be this moment of slowing down and taking that time for yourself. And I think, like I said, it's something that a majority of us are operating out of, and we don't even fully realize or recognize. I know when I think about burnout for myself, and even just witnessing it in friends around me, ultimately burnout is not something that happens overnight. It's not like you wake up one day and you're just burnt out. It really is that slow depletion over time, or that slow overextending yourself 1% here, 1% there. And then before you know it, you realize that you've compromised, whether it's your time, your energy, whatever it may be, that you've arrived to the state of, oh my gosh, you are so overwhelmed, you're so exhausted, you're so irritable, you're so weak, you're so vulnerable, that you've ultimately depleted yourself and burnt yourself out. I also think when it comes to the topic of burnout, which this is something I was reflecting on as we were preparing for this topic today, is that there are different types of burnout, but specifically the types that I will be speaking on and even kind of share more about my own experience as of late later on in the episode is there's internal burnout and there's external burnout. I think internal burnout can be the result of maybe emotionally straining yourself or overextending your capacity, maybe not having boundaries on your time. And that's something that you can relinquish control of with, implementing boundaries, with identifying areas you're overextended, so on and so forth. But then there's also external burnout, which is the result of circumstances that are kind of outside of you. Maybe there's circumstances that, are still within your control to some sort of extent, but still at the end of the day, it's kind of circumstances that surround you that are also causing that additional burnout that maybe you don't have the ability to control or change, but you have to learn how to react and just kind of mitigate those different kind of circumstances in your life. So yeah, those are just some of the things that I think about when I think about burnout.
I love how you broke it up to external and internal. I think that's so important to kind of help us think about it and distinguish it. And one more thing, not to get too in the weeds of this, but I was also trying to just kind of identify the causes in the first place. And same thing, I broke it down to cause number one, and this is at least I'm just speaking from personal experience. So I think number one is when we fill our time with the wrong things or too many things. So a lot of times that's when you're feeling that sense of just being stressed or overwhelmed, or like you mentioned, I think this is when boundaries become really important, which we're not going to dive too deep into today just because we have an episode on it. But then the second part is when we are not prioritizing resting, or we're not resting in a way that is recharging us properly. So we're going to kind of touch on that at the end of this episode of just kind of what does effective rest and resting well really look like for us to ensure that we can actually overcome burnout? Because if you're listening to this, you might be like us where we're kind of in the weeds of it, and now we're having to backpedal a little bit and actually get out of this cycle and just kind of beat it. But Brie, I wanted to ask you, how do you identify burnout in your own life?
Yes. So this is honestly so perfect because it's so relevant to me right now. And I just want to share some of the ways that I've been experiencing burnout recently. And these are, things that I'm currently kind of confronted within this past week within myself, but also have identified it at different points in my life when I'm particularly burnt out and exhausted. I think for me, first and foremost, I'm such a feeler. And so the number one way I can identify burnout in my life is emotional depletion. I get really overwhelmed. I think I get hypersensitive. And at least this week, that kind of came out through crying a lot. Like, I think I just had many moments where the most subtle of things would just make me almost like irritable and almost just like strike a chord in my heart and my spirit that I would just cry. And don't hear me wrong, crying is such a good thing. It's such a release. But at least for myself, I can see that emotional overwhelm. And I know, I'm experiencing a sensitivity that is the result of depletion. This is not my typical levels of sensitivity. This is truly the result of me just being so overwhelmed and so overextended. I think also for myself, something that I see is I can feel really disconnected, or I can feel not present. And I think that's a really hard thing that I start noticing myself when I just feel like I'm running on autopilot. And I actually had a moment this week where I was talking to my best friend and we were on the phone, and she was like asking me about something specific. And she's like, oh my gosh, like, how did that make you feel? Like, that's huge. And I was like, honestly, I don't even know how I feel about it because I haven't taken the time to think about it, which shows that I have been just operating on autopilot and just being so disconnected with even the good things that are happening. And so that's a really big sign for me. I also notice when like small daily tasks just overwhelm me so much. Like when the tiniest of things just makes me feel like I have no motivation to do it, or I just am getting really overwhelmed. I think that word overwhelm is something that I could repeat over and over and over again because it's such a prominent feeling of like overwhelm with my responsibilities, overwhelm with my emotions, overwhelm with my obligations, overwhelm even with like my friendships. I just feel this sense of overwhelm that feels so all encompassing, and just like nothing can negate it, nothing can get rid of it. I also think for myself as a creative gal, that's how my brain is wired. It honestly breaks my heart when I see this in myself, but I really know that I'm burnt out when I'm just not being creative. Like when I can't create, whether it's on social media or in any sort of which way that is an expression of myself. When the thought of creating or operating in my purpose and my gifts doesn't sound fun to me anymore, that's how I know that I'm burnt out. And I think that's so applicable to anyone who's listening. We all have gifts. We all have something we excel at. We all have something we're so good at, whether it's in your job, in your friendships, in your day-to-day life, whatever it is. We're all gifted in such unique ways. And the moment that we start seeing, at least I start seeing, that my natural inclinations or my natural giftings are not fun to me, and they're also overwhelming me, and they're not bringing me the joy and the purpose and the satisfaction, that's how I know, ooh, I am really burnt out. Also, something for myself, I find myself really painfully indecisive, which I know that being indecisive sometimes is not always a result of burnout. I know that making decisions can be really hard. Trust me, as someone who used to be indecisive all the time, I feel like I've worked really hard to become a more decisive person. But I think when I start seeing myself truly incapable of making such a simple decision, that indecisiveness for me is a sign of burnout, because it's also paired with that feeling of being really emotionally overwhelmed. Those are just some of the ways that I can really see burnout amplified in my life. And I do want to share a little bit, because I actually haven't shared on social media yet. Probably by the time this episode goes out, I'll have shared by then. But such a big reason, and also I don't want you guys to be concerned for me, but a huge reason why I'm feeling burnt out right now is because I'm actually in between moving situations and living situations. So I just moved out from my very first apartment here in LA, which served me so well, so grateful for it, but moved out and actually broke my lease. So it was like a very big momentum behind this move. And as of right now, I am living on friends' couches and have been like hopping around between living with different friends, which I'm so grateful for the friends here in LA who love me so dearly and want to extend their home and space for me. But I think not having a place in which I feel settled and feel secure, and then also trying to keep up with the momentum of my life and work and personal things, it really has me feeling a little more unsteady than I could have ever possibly predicted. And so that is the source of a lot of my burnout right now in this season. And I know that's going to change eventually, but yeah, that's where I'm at right now, transparently. And like I said, I share that to invite you guys into this conversation and into this friendship, because like I said, to preface this conversation, we are so in the weeds with you, and we want you to know that we can so relate to whatever you are feeling or experiencing right now. But with that said, that is me, and that's me right now. And I would love to hear from you, Marissa, about a time in your life where you felt burnt out.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to touch on real quickly when you were saying that, I've just come to realize as I started sharing that we were going to talk about burnout, so many people in my life have been like, oh my gosh, thank goodness. Like, this is so normal. I think we almost feel guilty sometimes admitting it. But I just want to affirm that so many people in your life are in the thick of. And I think when you can just give yourself that permission and recognize and say, I'm burnt out, that gives a sense of freedom to not only yourself, but to others, where you can say like, I'm not operating at capacity, or yeah, it just gives you that permission to be like, I'm so sorry. I would love to like be so present in this, but I'm also kind of depleted. So
that just reminded me of such a thought that I really want to encourage you guys with. So I I'm going to speak from my personal experience of this week, but I just had a moment where I was so burnt out. Literally, I felt like I cried more last week than I think I've cried in a long time. And I just want to like say, if that's you, that's so okay. Like, you're so human, and it doesn't mean that you're not capable or you're not strong or you're not this. It's like you are just a human at the end of the day. So please give yourself permission to weep over the things you need to weep at and recognize where you have fallen short. But also, I think something that was really redeeming to me in my burnout this week is I was talking with a friend, and I was just like bawling my eyes out because I was like, I feel like I'm not being a good friend, and I feel like I can't show up, and I feel like I just don't have the emotional capacity to be there for you. And she just looked at me and reminded me, Brie, your ultimate worth and value as a friend is not always going to be in what you can give. Like, at the end of the day, the people who love you because of who you are, not what you have to give to them. And
That's so good.
I feel like I honestly, not that I forgot about that, but I wasn't even anticipating sharing that. But I do feel like in this moment, I meant to share that for anyone who is listening and is feeling burnt out, and you are feeling maybe that shame, as Marissa was describing, of, gosh, I think we're all trying to operate at 100%, but we're human and we're not meant to. And I think we fear bringing it up to people around us when we're, low on capacity or just feeling like we're not doing the most. And I just want this to be a reminder to you right now in this moment as we continue forth in this conversation. You are still so incredible at low capacity. You are still so loved at low capacity. And the people in your life who want to support you through this feeling of burnout are not going to place this expectation that you have to operate at your 100% all the time. People still want you at your 50%. People still want you at your 30%. They still want you at your 10%. And they are there to nurture you back to that 100%. We are here to nurture you back to your 100%. And so I just want to remind you of that, because I know I needed those words spoken over me this week, particularly of like, Brie, you are still loved. You didn't like lose. The loss of your capacity wasn't the loss of how much people love you. And I know for me, sometimes I can think that in my mind.
That's so beautiful. I'm so happy you mentioned that. I feel like I didn't even really put it together when I was thinking about burnout, but I really feel like it's so attached to just that feeling of inadequacy, of like, there's so much guilt that comes with it, where whether it's in work or maybe our family life, maybe you're a mom and you just feel that guilt of like, oh my gosh, I'm not being enough. But it's not that you're not enough. It's that it's performance based. Like, you feel like just because you don't have an abundance to give, that suddenly that changes like your sense of worth, when we just want to say that is absolutely so not the case. And actually, I think people really don't expect as much from us as we think. Like, I think a lot of this, it comes from just pressure we put on ourselves. Probably the first step to burnout is just removing that expectation that just sits so heavy. And there's just so much fighting for our attention, whether it is like on social media or in our work or just even in relationships. And I think it's okay to say like, okay, I just need to shut out some of this noise. Why am I here? Kind of going back to the basics of, what is the value I add? And it's okay to not only say no, but just give yourself that permission that sometimes you're only going to show up at 50% capacity. And that is so okay. And that actually is so normal. Like, I think it would be abnormal if we were always at 100%. That's just not sustainable. And I think that's going to ebb and flow. Like, there are going to be times in our lives where we can show up at 100%. And then other seasons where it's just, that's not sustainable to do every single day. And so I think it really is up to us to just kind of communicate that. And I think it will give other people permission to do the same, of like, oh my gosh, they're just being a human being by sharing that. And
And I think people can also, at least for myself, when I see like a friend that I love or a person I admire confess their shortcomings, I think it really creates this beautiful synchronicity in which there's nothing more special than being able to relate to someone. Like, even someone you admire or look up to, when you hear that they're struggling or they're feeling like they're falling short, I think it just creates that harmony between two humans of, gosh, I see you, I feel you. And that doesn't make you admire someone any less. That doesn't make you love anyone any less. So really taking a hold of that and believing that that is true for yourself. And also something that I really try to do, especially this week alone, like I keep emphasizing, is, in this week and maybe in the week beyond it, I cannot compare my best to what was my best at 100%. And so all I can do in order to love myself through this depleted period is to really just compare my best to nothing else. Like allow my best that day to be its best and not Bree's best a month ago. And I think there's a time and place to compare yourself to yourself in order to make yourself better. But if you are in this burnout season and you are feeling that sensitivity and you are feeling that exhaustion, the best thing you can do for yourself is to not compare yourself to yourself, is to not compare, oh, well, I had this capacity then, I should be able to do this now. If you don't, you don't. And that's totally okay. And literally, as I'm speaking, I feel like I'm just reminding myself of this. And I think that's also the greatest thing that we can do in this conversation is, what is the advice you would give to a friend? Like even the advice that I'm giving y'all right now listening, I so need to receive for myself. And it's so easy for me to extend that to you guys because I love you guys, but also in return, loving myself enough to be willing to accept my own advice in this. I think with all of this in mind and kind of emphasizing where I've been this past week, I know that when I've, had conversations with Marissa, with friends, something that I've been really reflecting on are what are the ways that I can avoid arriving to this place in the first place and avoid burnout altogether. And I think something that's a really, really big thing that I know for myself, I have kind of failed at doing within the past 2 weeks, and especially in the midst of so much transition, is really implementing boundaries, which we have an entire episode on the importance of boundaries and how boundaries can be so life-giving and just induce so much freedom and harmony in your life. But I honestly need to re-listen to that episode because boundaries is something I've so lacked within this past couple weeks of my life, which has led me to this point. I think one of the ways that when I am operating at my best is I have so many boundaries with my time. So I'm very mindful of where am I putting my time? Am I giving myself enough time to rest and recharge while also seeing people I love? Am I having strict boundaries with work and hours that I'm operating? Am I having strict boundaries with where my time is going or what am I consuming or what conversations am I having? Am I having boundaries with the ways that I'm dedicating showing up for myself? Am I moving my body in the way that is honoring? Am I getting enough rest in a way that is honoring? Do I have that boundary with myself and that integrity with myself to nourish my body in the way that I know will help me feel optimal, or go to bed at the time that will allow me to rise with energy? And so I think for myself, I need to re-implement some of those things because I think as I've let certain things slip and I've overextended my time, I haven't been subtracting things in order to make sure things remain in harmony. So boundaries are a really, really, really big one for me. I think also, honestly, having honest conversations like this is really helpful in avoiding burnout. I know that, at least for myself, the people who love me most, the moment they start hearing me repeating things of like, I'm so tired, I'm so this, I'm so that, they call that out in me. And they're like, Brie, I keep hearing you say this. What can we do right now to change that? And so those are just some of the ways that I know I can avoid burnout if I were talking about it more and implementing more strict boundaries with my time and also prioritizing rest. I think that's a whole topic within itself. But Marissa, I would love to hear from you. What are some tangible ways that you try to avoid that burnout?
I love that you mentioned other people speaking that in your life, because I feel like that's something I do in marriage, but I haven't really thought to do with friends just because I don't want to, you want to be mindful of that boundary that they might have. But that is definitely something I want to be aware of too, because I think if you can catch it before it happens, that can be just so amazing. And sometimes it doesn't work out that way. But my advice to that, and something that I'm just trying to remind myself of constantly, is just assessing my capacity. So this is something that it's so important because it's ever evolving and changing. I think it can change based on the season of life we're in, but also just based on, I don't know, how busy things are. Like, especially now that we're entering into the summer, I know everything gets a little more hectic.
I know, and more exciting, but also capacity.
Yes.
Gotta check in on it.
There's so many good things to say yes to, and there are so many fun things about summer, but it's really easy to let those like good yeses actually end up being more destructive down the line. So actually I'm reading a book which I recommend. It's called The Best Yes by Lisa. I think her last name's ToKirst. I can put it in the description, and it's not specifically on boundaries, but she was talking about this idea of what our capacity looks like. And it has a lot of wisdom on decision making, which is something I'm trying to get better at. And something she's really good at kind of unpacking is just this idea of, if you're going to say yes or add an additional new thing into your life, like for example, we started a podcast and obviously that's going to take a new amount of time. It's really important that you're providing space for that, or that you're removing something else if you don't have that space to begin with. And that is absolutely something I've experienced firsthand, where it's been so incredible launching this, but I didn't realize just how much time actually goes into having a podcast that we're uploading weekly and recording and editing and all of that fun stuff. And I just really needed to take a step back and look at what my actual capacity was and see what the structure of my week was. And okay, I work 8 to 6, and then I have these social commitments and marriage and these passions of mine and friendships, all of this stuff, just, I don't know, taking care of your body, making time to make healthy food for you. Like, the list is kind of never ending. And so when I'm saying yes to something, I so have to evaluate it beforehand and not after the fact. And kind of the second part to that is understanding what that threshold is. So I think it's a very fine line that we have to be so mindful of. Even too much of life-giving things can burn us out. So like I mentioned, like the podcast is so life-giving for us, but even the best of things can unfortunately lead to burnout. I think our threshold is just something that we're just always learning about. And so something that I've kind of started to define in my own mind, and I hope I can explain this because it's kind of a new train of thought for me, but it's balancing things that I have to do with life-giving things. So basically balancing the draining in your life. So again, you might not be able to control the actual circumstances. So maybe you don't find your work particularly life-giving. I think it's really important that you then have something afterwards that is life-giving, that kind of balances it out. Maybe on the other hand, you do find your work super life-giving. So then after work, maybe you can do something that's more draining, like cleaning the house or these other things. And so I've started to think of not only my capacity, but also just like labeling, okay, is this thing life-giving? Because if it isn't, I'm going to have to be super intentional that then I do balance it with something that is. I hope that kind of makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. I love that.
It's kind of like a science almost.
Yeah.
It's hard when you're in kind of the weeds of it to get that like macro perspective. And I think when we just are journaling or processing or kind of writing out that capacity and threshold, we start to see, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense because I spent all of last week doing things that weren't life-giving. So even though I had a little bit of free time, I wasn't actually balancing that in the way I should. So that kind of brings us to the last kind of section I want to unpack, which is how can we prioritize rest and resting properly? And I think number one, it's just giving yourself permission to rest in the first place because it's so important. I think rest allows us to invest in the people and the things that we're really passionate about, but also just resting intentionally, not just, I mean, this could be life-giving to you, I'm not sure, but I know for me that just scrolling on social media or just doing these kind of mindless activities doesn't actually recharge me. So I have to be really intentional that when I do have the luxury of time to rest, I want to rest in a way that's really effective. So how do you kind of rest in a way that actually recharges you?
I love that you called out the social media part because I literally found myself doing that last night. I was so exhausted that it's so easy to like default to those mindless activities. Like I was on TikTok and I was just scrolling, and then before I knew it, it was like 20 minutes, maybe longer. I don't know. And I realized I was like, dang, I still feel so restless in this moment. Like this is not recharging me. And I think it's easy to reach for those things and grab them because they're easy and they're accessible. But to what you said, the rest that we choose is really going to be the deciding factor of whether we are recharged or we're restless. And so for myself, when it comes to resting and recharging, I think for me, at least, I know this can look so differently for everyone. I know the conversation of being an extrovert versus introvert comes in, but as someone who is extroverted, even yet, I do find that for me, ultimately, the way that I rest and recharge is through intentional alone time. And that word intentional is very, very key here because I think there are ways that you can be alone, like I was kind of doing last night where I'm sitting on the couch and just scrolling on TikTok. But then there's also ways that you can be intentional with yourself and show up for yourself and really be so present with the rest that you are giving yourself and the time you're giving yourself. I think of like simple things that I love to do, which I'm sure so many people out there listening might love to do as well, like going on walks and going to coffee and maybe go grabbing your favorite meal. But this is where I want to encourage an extra step of intentionality because I think these are things that so many of us do on the day-to-day, but we're not really intentionally present with ourselves on days that I'm like, I'm going to go through these normal rhythms of my life, like get coffee, go on a walk, go grab food. But on days I know that I need some extra loving and I need some extra intentionality, when I'm walking into a coffee shop, I am so present with what I'm doing. Like there's something about it when you just tune in your mind and your heart and your soul and your senses and your spirit and your eyes and everything to be so present. Be so present when you're ordering your coffee. Maybe take your coffee, sit down in the coffee shop and sip it. Don't be on your phone. Don't check your phone. Don't be scrolling. Maybe go on a walk and put in your favorite song or your favorite podcast. Maybe it's ours. But also maybe being intentional with yourself that day on your walk is not listening to anything and just being so present with your mind. What are you thinking in this moment? Like, what are the thoughts going through your head? What is the heaviness on your heart? Maybe your walk can be you really dissecting that and actually not listening to any noise of the world and not scrolling on social media and not taking a photo, which I love to do so often. And maybe that walk and that rest that day is being so aware of what thoughts are going through your mind, being so aware of what color is the sky that day. Be so aware of the houses in your neighborhood. It's just that 1% greater awareness that brings intentionality into the little things that we may already be doing in our day-to-day life, but we're not actually being present with. I also think something that I like to do for myself is like I always look at little things like getting coffee or grabbing food as like intentionally taking myself on a date, which I know it's rhythms that so many of us do so often. Like we go and order food and we don't think twice about it. But what would it look like if you walked into your favorite place where you're ordering food and instead of taking it to go or, sitting there and eating and being on your phone, what if you took the meal and sat with the meal and you weren't on your phone? What if you just were so present with every single bite you were taking, so present with even the faces that were walking in and just brought this level of awareness to you and your surroundings that you are intentionally being present with yourself. Just as when you are having lunch with a friend, you're not sitting there on your phone and scrolling the entire time you're trying to talk to them. What if you did the same with yourself? I think it's just inviting that level of intentionality that maybe you wouldn't otherwise have, that I know for myself is really restful. And then something that I also want to speak into is I think there's also a time and space when all these things of the world, whether it's more sleep, or watching a movie, getting cozy on the couch, being in your sweatpants, going on a walk, getting coffee, ordering your favorite food. We can do that a lot and it can be restful and recharged. But I know that there's a point for me that I know that I've hit specifically within this week where all these things of this world still can't satiate that feeling of restlessness. And that's where I know for me, no matter how cozy I am, no matter what movies I watch, no matter what good food I'm eating, when I still feel like I'm lacking rest, I know that what my heart is yearning for is spiritual rest. And that is a completely different ballgame. That is something that the world can't satisfy. That is something that no amounts of sleep, no amounts of alone time, no amounts of anything can truly satiate. And so when I am aware that what my heart and my soul needs is spiritual reset and spiritual rest, that's when I'm like, okay, whoa, I not only need to be intentional with my time and with the things that I'm doing, but I need to be intentional with my spirit. And so when I do that, one of the ways that I love to fill my cup up is really making sure, it doesn't matter what time of the day, whether it's the morning, the afternoon, the evening, I'm really making sure that I'm spending time with God. I love to journal. I know that that is a practice that so many people speak on, but what would it look like for you if you actually really seriously wrote down all of the heavy thoughts that were happening in your mind, in your life, and you actually surrender them and you actually release them? I think even, I don't know about you, Marissa, but I think on social media right now, there's such a hype around journaling, but I'm like, no, it's so, there's like a level of seriousness of like, no, this is not just like a glamorized self-care thing that we should be doing. It's a way to surrender. It's a way to release. It's a way to actually let go of the grip that all the things of this world has on us and really just lay them down. And so for me, journaling and spending time in prayer and talking to God is the number one thing that when nothing of this world can recharge me, that really, really recharges me. And so those are just some of the ways that I personally love to have my cup filled up. Yeah.
Those are like, it's so funny because I'm like, yes, same. Yes, same to every single one. I like actually could not agree more. I feel like ours are like nearly identical. And just at first I had written down that I think so perfectly embodies exactly what you were saying when you were talking about just spiritually needing to be filled up is Matthew 11:28. And it says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." I always just repeat that phrase in my mind, rest for your souls, because there's just that, it can't be put into words. Like when your soul is depleted, it is such a distinct feeling. And it's funny because I'll just be going about my day and I'll like, let's say I skipped my quiet time in the morning or reading my Bible or all of these like disciplines I have in place that I'm not perfect at sticking to. I will genuinely just feel a little bit depleted. And I'm like, why is this the case? And then I'll like be reviewing my day and oh my gosh, I forgot to receive that rest. I think there's something about just sitting and being still with God, and you don't have to do anything. You don't have to say anything. That is when performance can just be put to the sidelines and you just can say, God, I just need rest. I need you to fill me up in a way that only you can. And oh my gosh, like when he fills up your soul, there is no other feeling like it. It is just so overwhelming and just so incredible.
Yes. And I think that's also where that's a part of burnout that I don't feel like I hear people talk about. It's when the things of this world and the acts of self-love and the acts of self-care all fall short. They are going to fall short. And that is a promise and that is a guarantee. And you can self-love yourself all day long. But if your soul is empty, my girl or my guy, you are going to continue feeling empty. And it wasn't until for me that I identified, oh, what my body needs is not more rest. It's not more alone time. It's not more, I don't know, going to the sauna or working out or all these beautiful things that are necessary. But what my body and mind needs is a soul recharge. I need to go plug in to the source, and I need to really refuel my heart and my soul and my spirit. And no matter who's listening out there, it's like you have a heart and you have a soul and you have a spirit about you. And there's something deep within you that is longing to reconnect. And for us, that's God. And for us, that is plugging in and just talking to God. But whatever that looks like for you, if you are finding yourself feeling like you are wearing so thin, I really encourage you, maybe it's time to put aside some of the self-love or self-care things that you're doing and actually see how you can reconnect with your soul and your spirit. Because I know for us, like when my strength falls so short and when I literally can't rest myself well, I love tapping into God and I love turning to God because He gives me a strength that I'm actually incapable of accessing. And that restores my burnout. And sometimes that doesn't restore my circumstance. Like my circumstances are the exact same, even yet like the world around me can still remain and it can still feel a little chaotic, but I have access to rest in my spirit and rest in my heart and soul because it's coming from a source and coming from a strength that is so outside of myself.
That is so beautiful. I think it's so tempting when we feel burnout. We just want to numb ourselves. And I think that is so our instinct and kind of our go-to default. I know it is, at least for me. And everything that you're saying and that I personally like doing, it's all about like reconnecting to yourself, which at times like that can feel kind of painful, that you might feel like a sense of friction because you're having to be aware of your circumstances, what you're actually thinking, your mind, your body. It's about really kind of like stepping into, I don't know, just becoming like in touch and like getting attuned with your senses and the world around you. And so I definitely would say like it it can be a challenge and it's not like a quick fix. But I think if you can do anything, like if you only have 5 minutes, just try to reconnect with yourself and try to just receive like the abundance that God has to offer. Because it might not fix your circumstances, but oh my gosh, it can make such a difference in just how you feel.
Yes, it can restore your joy as you're navigating the circumstances.
Absolutely.
I even think about me right now in this moment, like filming this podcast. Like truly, if you would have told me that I would have had the energy to do this, I would have laughed. But like something I did intentionally as I was driving over here in preparation for the podcast is I just was in the car and I just prayed. I was like, God, give me a strength that I literally do not have on my own, that Brie is not capable of mustering. And in those still and quiet moments in my car, literally me talking out loud, the person next to me at a stoplight would think I would look crazy. It was in that moment that I felt a joy restored. And it really can be that simple. And so, if there's anything that we really do pray that you guys just take away is to what Marissa said, don't be afraid of connecting with yourself. Don't avoid the pain or avoid the circumstances or allow shame and guilt and just feelings of not enoughness prevent you from really getting present with yourself, reconnecting with yourself, and also inviting God in, asking for that strength because it is so available to you.
Okay, so I know burnout can be a bit of a heavy topic, so we wanted to end with just kind of a playful little game because this is my absolute favorite part. We're going to be doing most likely to. So I'm going to read a question and then maybe we'll count to 3 and then say who it is. So if it's yourself, just say like Brie or Marissa. Okay, perfect. And then we'll see what we think. Okay, I'm super curious.
I have not seen these beforehand, so I'm so curious to know what's going to be asked.
I made these a while ago, so they'll be new to me.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, number 1 is who is most likely to spontaneously move to a foreign country? 1, 2, 3.
Brie.
Me.
For sure. That's like my dream.
When I wrote that question, I was thinking of you. I was like, this just is Brie. I'm waiting for the day I get the text or call. And you're like, so actually I'm just like moving to Europe.
I'm moving to Italy. That's like truly my dream.
I could so see that. I'm excited to visit you.
One day.
But don't leave, please.
No, not yet. Not yet.
Okay, number 2. Who is most likely to stay in and watch Netflix on a Friday night? 1, 2, 3,
Marissa.
both.
I was gonna say both, but if I had to choose,
cheat it. Yeah.
If I had to choose one, maybe you. But honestly, I think that's honestly very equal. I feel like I'm such a homebody. I just love to be cozy at home.
Yeah, I feel like we both that would be like our ideal Friday night. I do feel like if only one of us was doing that, like I'm maybe a little more likely.
Yeah, I think you'd be like a little bit more likely if I rallied myself and I was going out on a Friday night. And by going out, like literally probably watching Netflix. Yeah, going to Air One and watching Netflix on someone else's couch, not my couch.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, number 3. Who is most likely to sleep through their alarm? 1, 2, 3, Marissa.
Yeah, definitely you. Not definitely. I don't mean that aggressively. I feel like my body's weird and I almost always wake up before my alarm.
Yeah, I feel like you're such an early bird.
I am, except for today I slept in.
Have you ever slept through your alarm?
I probably have at some point in my life, but not recently that I could like recollect that happening.
I am like debating if I admit this, but I had a somewhat recent sleep through my alarm encounter, and I slept through. I joined a meeting at work like midway through the meeting. And everyone knew, and it was so embarrassing, but they were so sweet about it. It was 8:45, and I start work at 8.
The meeting was at 8?
It was at 8:30.
Jeez, it's too early.
We have a meeting with our team every day at 8:30, and ever since that day, like it was always my fear that I was gonna like sleep through, miss my alarm, and then just that one day it happened. It was so weird. It was like a Friday, and my body was just so exhausted, probably burnt out, and so that happened, and oh my gosh, I was so embarrassed. I still cringe thinking about it. Question number 4: Who is most likely to have 4 or more kids? 1.
Oh no, I don't know.
I don't know either.
What do you want? Okay.
1, 2, 3,
Brie. Oh, yeah.
I love that. Like, I am down to have like maybe 3 kids, but I think once I hit the 4 mark, I'm like, that's a lot.
Yeah.
But I could see you just sending it and being like, why not?
Oh my gosh. My mom always says, Mom, if you're listening, that I'm going to have twins. So that would just make it easier. I mean, I don't know if I want twins. I just get nervous of like carrying 2 babies at once, but I do definitely want, at least right now, the thought of having a bigger family sounds really special. So
I would love to have a big family.
We'll see.
Okay. Question number 5. Who is most likely to delete their social media? Just like permanently, not just like a 1-week delete, but like she's gone off the internet. 1, 2, 3,
Marissa. Definitely Marissa. You will never find me not on social media. But Marissa, you've done that before, actually.
I have, but I've never just like completely
deleted it.
Just like deleted my whole account. But honestly, if the Lord calls me to, I would hit that delete button and never look back.
Bye. I could never. I love social media.
Yeah,
we're
that
so
also
opposite.
Is like so a part, I feel like, of your calling and your creativity. Whereas I feel like I would be happy to live like if phones disappeared tomorrow, I would be thriving.
Yeah, I would be without a job.
True. Okay, question 6. For this one, you're gonna have to pretend I'm still single. So.
Oh my gosh.
Who is most likely to get engaged after only dating someone for a few months?
Oh, wow.
1, 2, 3, Marissa.
I was going to say me.
I could totally see you doing that.
But I don't know. I think actually I've changed my mind. I would say you. I don't know. I think I used to think that I'd be that way. But I think the older I get and the longer that the Lord's keeping me single, but not for long, right, God? No, just kidding. I think I definitely don't see myself dating someone for a long time, but I would probably date someone like a year. So a year, you maybe. I don't know. It's so hard for me to even conceptualize you single. Like, I've never known you single.
Yeah, and I think like I dated my husband because I met him at 18, so we dated for 2.5 years. So I'm like, that was quite some time. But if I had to date again, I would be like, no funny business. We are getting engaged like 4 months. Maybe not actually.
4 months.
Because I do think there's something great about like going through every season of life.
Yes.
But it's just because now I've obviously been married. So I feel like I know myself and what I'm looking for so clearly that I would know after like the first or second date. But maybe I would wait. I would just like know right away.
Yeah. I feel like I'll definitely know. But I still think I'll probably date for a year.
I think that's healthy.
Yeah. Just being discerning.
Those are all of my questions.
Those were such good ones.
That was fun.
That was so fun.
We love you guys so much, and we will see you in the next episode.
Bye, guys. Love you.
Thank you so much for listening. We pray this episode was encouraging and life-giving. If you found it valuable, please share it with a friend, leave a review, and subscribe.
And be sure to follow us along over on Instagram at With Love Always Podcast. Signing off with all of our love always, Bree
and Marissa.